The mysterious encounter. The night was calm, the kind of stillness that felt heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. The small town of Brookhaven was used to quiet evenings, where the only sound came from the occasional car passing by or the faint hum of crickets in the distance. Tonight, however, something felt different. Ethan sat at his usual corner booth in the diner, sipping a lukewarm cup of coffee. The place was almost empty except for the cook in the back and an older couple sharing a piece of pie at the counter. Ethan liked it that way. He wasn't much for crowds or noise. He preferred the quiet moments where he could get lost in his thoughts. The bell above the diner door jingled, snapping him out of his reverie. He looked up, and his eyes widened. A woman had entered, and she wasn't like anyone he had ever seen before. She was tall and graceful, with hair that shimmered faintly under the fluorescent lights. Her eyes were a piercing shade of silver, almost glowing, and her skin had an unusual smoothness, as if it were untouched by time or blemish. She glanced around the diner, her gaze lingering briefly on Ethan before she chose a booth near the window. Ethan couldn't help but notice how everyone in the diner had gone silent, their attention drawn to the mysterious woman. Even the cook peeked out from the kitchen, curiosity etched on his face. Ethan tried to focus on his coffee, but his curiosity got the better of him. He stole another glance at her. She sat perfectly still, staring out at the night sky as if searching for something. There was something otherworldly about her, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The waitress, Mary, approached the woman hesitantly, holding a notepad. "What can I get for you, honey?" she asked, her voice unusually soft. The woman turned to Mary and smiled faintly. "Just water," she said, her voice melodic but distant, as if she were speaking from somewhere far away. Mary nodded and hurried off, clearly unnerved. Ethan could see the older couple whispering to each other, their eyes darting toward the woman. He felt the same pull of curiosity they did, but there was something more. He felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if he had seen her before, though he was certain he hadn't. Unable to resist, Ethan stood up and made his way to her booth. As he approached, she looked up at him, her silver eyes locking onto his. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice steadier than he expected. She studied him for a long moment before nodding. "If you wish." Ethan slid into the seat across from her. Up close, she was even more striking. Her features were delicate but sharp, her expression calm yet guarded. "I'm Ethan," he said, offering a small smile. "You're new around here, aren't you?" The woman tilted her head slightly, as if considering how to respond. "You could say that." "Just passing through," he probed. She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the window. "I shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "It's not safe." Ethan frowned. "Not safe. Brookhaven's the safest place you'll find. Nothing ever happens here." She shook her head. "Not for me. And not for you, if you keep talking to me." Her words sent a chill down his spine, but they only fueled his curiosity. "Why wouldn't it be safe?" he asked. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" The woman's gaze softened, and for a moment, she looked almost sad. "I can't explain," she said. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me," Ethan said, leaning forward. "I'm a good listener." She opened her mouth to speak but stopped herself, glancing around the diner as if checking to see if anyone was watching. Finally, she sighed and said, "I was told not to talk to humans." Ethan blinked. "Humans? What are you talking about?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stood up abruptly, her movements fluid and silent. "Forget you saw me," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "For your own good." Before Ethan could respond, she walked out of the diner, leaving him sitting there in stunned silence. He turned to look out the window and saw her heading toward the forest at the edge of town. She moved quickly, disappearing into the shadows. Ethan sat back, his mind racing. Who was she? What did she mean by not safe? And why did she say she wasn't supposed to talk to humans? None of it made sense, but one thing was clear. He couldn't just let it go. Something about her drew him in, and he had to know more. As he stared out at the dark forest, a faint light flickered between the trees, pulsing like a heartbeat. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, ignoring the warnings echoing in his mind. Whatever was happening, he wasn't going to let it end here. The forbidden connection. The night air was colder than usual as Ethan pushed through the dense underbrush of the forest. The flickering light he had seen from the diner grew brighter with every step he took, casting eerie shadows on the trees. His heart pounded, not just from exertion, but from a strange mix of fear and curiosity. He wasn't sure why he was so determined to find her. Maybe it was the way she had looked at him, as if she carried the weight of a secret too heavy to bear alone. After what felt like an eternity, he emerged into a small clearing. At its center stood the woman, her silver hair shimmering in the pale light of the moon. But it wasn't the moonlight alone that illuminated her. Beside her was a strange, humming device, its surface smooth and metallic, glowing faintly with blue light. It was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen, and he knew instantly it wasn't from this world. Aria, he didn't know why the name sprang to his mind, but it felt right, was kneeling beside the device, her hands moving swiftly over its surface, as if she were trying to repair it. She didn't notice him at first, too focused on her task. Her expression was tense, and there was an urgency in her movements that made Ethan hesitate. But then, as if sensing his presence, she froze. Slowly, she turned her head, her silver eyes locking onto his once more. There was no surprise in her gaze this time, only a mixture of frustration and sorrow. "You shouldn't have followed me," she said, her voice low but firm. Ethan stepped closer, his hands raised slightly as if to show he meant no harm. "I couldn't just let you go. You left so many questions behind." Aria stood, her posture rigid. "Some questions are better left unanswered, Ethan." He blinked at the sound of his name. "How do you know my name?" She hesitated, her gaze flicking to the device before returning to him. "I know a lot about you, about this town, about your people." Ethan's stomach turned uneasily. "What do you mean, my people? Who are you?" For a moment, Aria didn't answer. She seemed to be weighing her words, her expression troubled. Finally, she sighed. "I am not from here, not from this world." Ethan laughed nervously, though he didn't feel amused. "Right. You're telling me you're an alien." "Yes," she said simply, her tone devoid of humor. The word hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. Ethan stared at her, waiting for her to laugh or tell him it was a joke. But she didn't. Her silver eyes held his, steady and serious. "This can't be real," he muttered, taking a step back. "Aliens aren't real." Aria shook her head. "Your kind is so quick to dismiss what you don't understand. But I don't have time to convince you. You've already put yourself in danger by coming here." "Danger? From what?" Ethan demanded. "You keep saying things like that, but you're not explaining anything." She stepped closer to him, her expression softening. "Ethan, I wasn't supposed to talk to you. I wasn't even supposed to be seen. My mission is to observe, nothing more." "Observe? Why? What are you looking for?" he asked, his voice rising with frustration. She hesitated again, her gaze dropping to the ground. "To understand you. To understand humanity." Ethan frowned. "Why? What does your people want with us?" Her eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw fear in them. "They don't understand your emotions, your connections to each other. To them, it's a weakness. Something dangerous." "And what do you think?" Ethan asked, his voice softer now. Aria looked away. "I think they're wrong. But my opinion doesn't matter. What matters is that they know I've broken the rule. I've interacted with you, and they will come for me. And if they find you with me." She didn't finish the sentence, but the look in her eyes was enough to send a chill down Ethan's spine. "I don't care," he said, surprising himself. "If you're in trouble, I want to help." Arya shook her head. You don't understand what you're offering. This isn't your fight. Maybe not, Ethan said, stepping closer. But you're standing here, risking everything because you think something about us is worth protecting. Maybe it's time someone stood up for you too. For a moment, she just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. You're more stubborn than I thought. Before Ethan could respond, the device beside her emitted a sharp, high-pitched sound. Arya's smile vanished, replaced by a look of alarm. They know, she whispered, her voice trembling. They found me. A low rumble shook the ground, and the light from the device pulsed brighter. Ethan turned toward the trees, his heart pounding as he saw faint, glowing shapes moving through the darkness. What do we do? He asked, panic rising in his voice. Arya grabbed his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Run, she said, and don't look back. The secret unveiled. The night swallowed them whole as Ethan and Arya ran through the dense forest. The air was thick, heavy with the hum of unseen forces. Behind them, the faint glow of alien lights flickered like ghosts, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for them. Ethan's lungs burned, his legs screaming for rest, but Arya's grip on his hand was unrelenting. She moved with a grace that seemed almost unnatural, her strides effortless despite the chaos around them. Where are we going? Ethan gasped, struggling to keep up. Somewhere it won't find us, Arya replied, her voice steady despite the urgency in her movements. Ahead, the forest opened into a secluded clearing, hidden by towering rocks and overgrown vines. Arya slowed, scanning the area before pulling Ethan toward a cluster of boulders. She pressed her hand against a seemingly random section of stone, and a faint ripple of light spread outward, revealing a hidden entrance. Inside, she commanded, pushing him gently forward. Ethan hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the forest where the lights were growing brighter. With no other choice, he ducked into the entrance. The space inside was small but felt oddly safe, as if the walls themselves hummed with protective energy. Arya followed him, sealing the entrance behind them. The glow faded, plunging them into near darkness, save for the faint luminescence emanating from Arya herself. Ethan leaned against the cool rock, catching his breath. Okay, he said between gasps. Time to start explaining. Who are they? Why are they chasing you? And what the hell is going on? Arya remained silent for a moment, her silver eyes reflecting the dim light. She seemed to be struggling with something, as if deciding how much to tell them. Finally, she spoke. My name is Arya, she said, her voice softer now. I was, an observer. My kind sent me here to study humans, to understand your world. Study us? Ethan asked, his brow furrowing. Why? What's so interesting about us? Arya hesitated, looking down at her hands. At first, it was curiosity. Humans are different. You feel things so deeply. Your emotions, your connections to each other, they're unlike anything we've ever encountered. My people don't understand it. To them, emotions are dangerous, a distraction from logic and order. Ethan stared at her, struggling to process her words. So what? They sent you here to spy on us, to figure out how to use our emotions against us. No, Arya said quickly, her gaze snapping to his. Not at first, but things changed. They started to see your emotions as a weakness they could exploit. And now, they see your world as a resource. A resource. Ethan repeated, his voice rising. You're saying they want to invade us. Arya's silence was answer enough. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. Why are you telling me this? Why not just keep observing and go back to your people? Because I can't go back, Arya said, her voice trembling. Not after meeting you. Not after feeling what I felt. Ethan froze, his eyes locking onto hers. What do you mean? Arya took a step closer, her expression conflicted. I wasn't supposed to interact with humans, but I couldn't help it. You made me feel something I've never felt before, something my kind would never understand. And now, I can't pretend that it doesn't matter." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "What are you saying, Aria?" "I'm saying I care about you, Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And that care has made me a traitor to my own kind." The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the faint hum of energy outside grew louder. Aria's head snapped toward the entrance, her expression turning grim. "They'd found us," she said, her voice tight. "What do we do?" Ethan asked, panic creeping into his tone. Aria turned to him, her eyes blazing with determination. "We fight." "Fight," Ethan repeated, his voice cracking. "Against aliens. With what exactly?" Aria stepped closer to him, placing a hand on his chest. "I'll protect you, Ethan. No matter what happens, I won't let them hurt you." Her touch sent a strange warmth through him, calming his nerves despite the fear coursing through his veins. He nodded, swallowing hard. "Okay, what's the plan?" Aria moved to the far wall of the cave, pressing her hand against it again. This time, the ripple of light revealed a hidden compartment containing this sleek, glowing device. She handed it to Ethan. "This is a disruptor," she explained. "It will interfere with their technology, but only for a short time. You'll have to use it while I distract them." "Wait," Ethan said, his eyes widening. "You're going out there alone?" Aria smiled faintly. "I've spent my whole life following their rules, hiding in the shadows. If I'm going to break free, I have to face them." Ethan shook his head. "No, I'm not letting you do this alone." Aria placed a hand on his cheek, her touch gentle but firm. "You're stronger than you think, Ethan. Trust me." Before he could argue, the entrance to the cave began to glow, the alien lights seeping through the cracks. Aria turned toward it, her silver hair catching the light like a halo. "Stay behind me," she said, her voice steady. "And no matter what happens, don't stop believing in what makes your kind special. It's worth fighting for." The entrance burst open, and the shadows of the alien figures loomed large against the walls. Ethan's heart pounded as he gripped the disruptor, ready to fight for a world he didn't fully understand, but now felt compelled to protect. The chase. The cave erupted in a blinding flash of light as the entrance shattered. Ethan shielded his eyes, his heart racing as the hum of alien energy filled the air. Through the haze, shadowy figures emerged. Tall, angular beings with skin that shimmered like liquid metal under the moonlight. Their movements were unnervingly fluid, as if gravity barely touched them. Each carried a device that pulsed with a sinister glow, weapons far beyond anything Ethan had ever imagined. "Stay behind me," Aria said, her voice low but commanding. Her body seemed to radiate an unnatural energy, her silver eyes glowing brighter than ever. She stepped forward, putting herself between Ethan and the intruders. The alien figures paused, their heads tilting in unison as they regarded her. One of them stepped forward, taller than the rest, its voice an unsettling mix of mechanical distortion and ethereal resonance. "Aria," it said, the name sounding alien even in their distorted tone. "You have broken the covenant. You know the consequences." "I know," Aria replied, her tone steady. "But I won't let you harm him." The leader tilted its head again, almost curious. "This human, why would you risk everything for such a primitive being?" Aria squared her shoulders. "Because he is more than you can comprehend, more than you will ever understand." The aliens didn't respond immediately. Instead, the leader raised its weapon, a sleek, glowing staff that emitted a low hum. "You have betrayed your purpose. You will be erased." Ethan felt his chest tighten as the alien leveled its weapon at Aria. Without thinking, he stepped forward, his instincts screaming at him to protect her. "Leave her alone," he shouted, his voice trembling but resolute. The aliens turned their attention to him, their heads moving in eerie synchronization. "The human speaks," one of them said, its tone dripping with disdain. "Do you believe you can defy us, human?" Before Ethan could answer, Aria raised her hand. A burst of energy shot from her palm, striking the ground between them. The force sent a shockwave rippling through the clearing, causing the aliens to stagger. "Run, Ethan," Aria shouted, her voice sharp with urgency. "I'll hold them off." Ethan hesitated, his feet rooted to the ground. "I'm not leaving you." Aria turned to him, her expression fierce. "If you stay, they'll kill us both. Go, now." The desperation in her voice jolted Ethan into motion. Clutching the disruptor she'd given him, he turned and sprinted into the forest. Behind him, he heard the sounds of the battle. Blasts of energy, the crackle of electricity, and Aria's voice, firm and unyielding. The forest seemed alive with movement, shadows darting between the trees. Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed himself harder, the disruptor heavy in his hand. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he had to keep moving. A sudden burst of light lit up the forest behind him, followed by a deafening crack. Ethan glanced back and saw Aria, her body glowing with an intensity that outshone the alien weapons. She moved like a force of nature, dodging their attacks with inhuman speed, while countering with blasts of energy that shook the ground. But there were too many of them. Ethan's mind raced as he stumbled through the underbrush. He couldn't leave her to face them alone. He had to find a way to help. His fingers tightened around the disruptor, and an idea began to form. If the device could interfere with their technology, maybe he could use it to give Aria an advantage. Spotting a large tree with thick, low branches, Ethan climbed up as quickly as his trembling hands would allow. From his perch, he could see the clearing where Aria was fighting. The aliens had surrounded her, their weapons glowing ominously. Aria stood in the center, her movements slower now, her energy clearly waning. Ethan gritted his teeth. He couldn't let this happen. Taking a deep breath, he activated the disruptor. The device hummed in his hand, its glow intensifying. Aiming it toward the clearing, he pressed the trigger. A pulse of blue energy shot out, spreading like a wave over the battlefield. The effect was immediate. The alien weapons flickered and died, their glowing lights snuffed out like candles in the wind. The aliens froze, their movements jerky and confused as the pulse disrupted their systems. Aria seized the moment. With a burst of energy, she sent a shockwave through the clearing, knocking the aliens off their feet. She turned, her eyes locking onto Ethan's position in the tree. "Ethan, what are you doing?" she shouted, her voice a mix of anger and relief. "Helping you," he called back, climbing down as quickly as he could. As he reached the ground, Aria ran toward him, her expression grim. "You shouldn't have done that. Now they'll know you're a threat." Ethan shrugged, his heart still pounding. "Too late for that, don't you think?" Before Aria could respond, the forest lit up with a new wave of lights. Reinforcements were arriving, their approach marked by the low hum of alien technology. Aria grabbed Ethan's arm, her grip firm but not unkind. "We need to go. Now." Together, they ran deeper into the forest, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind them. Ethan didn't know where this would end, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let Aria face this alone. A desperate escape. The forest felt endless, a labyrinth of towering trees and tangled vines that seemed determined to slow their escape. The faint glow of alien lights pierced the darkness, casting eerie shadows that danced across the ground. Ethan's legs burned with every step, and his lungs felt like they were on fire, but he didn't dare stop. Beside him, Aria moved with a determination that seemed to defy exhaustion, her glowing silver eyes scanning the forest for any sign of danger or salvation. "They're gaining on us," Ethan said between gasps, glancing over his shoulder. The lights were closer now, their strange, rhythmic pulsing like the heartbeat of some otherworldly predator. "I know," Aria replied, her voice calm but strained. "There's a place up ahead. If we can make it, we might stand a chance." What kind of place? Ethan asked, struggling to keep up. A shielded area. They won't be able to track us there, she said, her tone leaving no room for doubt. Ethan nodded, trusting her despite the chaos around them. He didn't understand how she could stay so composed, but her confidence gave him strength. Together, they pushed forward, weaving through the forest like hunted animals. Suddenly, the trees opened into another clearing, this one dominated by a jagged cliff face. At its base was an opening, barely visible in the darkness. Arya pulled Ethan toward it, her grip firm, but not painful. "In here," she said, her voice low. Ethan hesitated for a moment, staring at the narrow entrance. "What is this place?" "A safe zone," Arya replied. "At least for now. Move." With a deep breath, Ethan followed her inside. The tunnel was narrow and cold, the air damp and heavy. The walls seemed to shimmer faintly, as if infused with some kind of alien energy. It was unsettling, but it also felt oddly protective, as though the very space repelled the pursuit of their enemies. Arya stopped once they were deep inside, pressing her hand against a section of the wall. A soft glow spread from her palm, and a faint hum filled the air. The opening behind them sealed shut, leaving them in near darkness. "They won't be able to track us in here," she said, leaning against the wall, as if the effort had drained her. Ethan sank to the ground, his back against the cool stone. "What now?" he asked, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Arya didn't answer immediately. She closed her eyes, her breathing slow and deliberate. For the first time, Ethan noticed how pale she looked, her usually radiant skin dull and her movements slower than before. "Arya," he said softly, concern creeping into his voice, "are you okay?" "I'll be fine," she said, though her tone wasn't convincing. "I just need to recover." Ethan frowned. "Recover from what? What's happening to you?" Arya hesitated, her gaze fixed on the ground. "Using my abilities takes energy, more than I have right now. I pushed too far back there." Ethan moved closer, kneeling in front of her. "What can I do? How can I help?" She looked up at him, her silver eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and sadness. "You've already helped more than I could have asked, but there's nothing you can do for me now. This is my fight." "No," Ethan said firmly, his voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside him. "This is our fight now. You said it yourself. You're here because you care about us. About me. That makes it my fight too." Arya's expression softened, and for a moment, she looked almost human. "You don't understand what you're up against, Ethan. My people, they're relentless. They don't forgive betrayal, and they don't leave loose ends. If they find us, they won't just kill me. They'll take you too. Study you. Use you." Ethan shuddered at the thought, but didn't back down. "Then we don't let them find us. You said this place is safe, right? At least for a little while." Arya nodded reluctantly. "Yes, the shield will hold for now." "Good," Ethan said. "Then we use this time to come up with a plan." Arya looked at him, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to find a reason to argue. Finally, she sighed. "You're more stubborn than I expected." Ethan grinned despite the situation. "I get that a lot." She allowed herself a small smile, but it quickly faded. "The device you used earlier, the disruptor, it bought us time, but it won't work again. They'll adapt." Ethan's heart sank. "So what do we do?" Arya hesitated, her gaze distant. "There's a way to stop them, to sever their connection to this place." "How?" Ethan asked, leaning forward. Arya's voice dropped to a near whisper. "The beacon. It's what brought me here and what keeps them tethered to this world. If we destroy it, they won't be able to stay." Ethan frowned. "Okay, so where is it?" Her eyes met his, and the look in them sent a chill down his spine. "It's not far, but getting to it will be almost impossible. It's heavily guarded, and once we get close, they'll know." "Then we'll figure it out," Ethan said, determination hardening his voice. "We don't have a choice, right?" Arya studied him for a long moment before nodding. "No, we don't. But Ethan, if we fail, there won't be a second chance." Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. "Then we won't fail." Arya smiled faintly, though her eyes were shadowed with doubt. "You're braver than you realize, Ethan. I just hope it's enough." As the hum of the shielded walls surrounded them, Ethan felt the gravity of what lay ahead. The odds were impossible, the risks unimaginable. But as he looked at Arya, fragile yet unyielding, he knew he couldn't walk away. Not now. Not ever. This fight wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about hope, about proving that even in the face of insurmountable odds, humanity, and whatever spark of it Arya had found, was worth fighting for. The sacrifice. The air inside the cave grew colder as Arya and Ethan planned their next move. The faint hum of the shielded walls surrounded them like a fragile cocoon, but the weight of what lay ahead was suffocating. Arya traced a rough map into the dirt floor, her fingers glowing faintly as she sketched out the route to the alien beacon. "This is where it's located," she said, pointing to a spot near the center of her map. "It's in an open clearing at the heart of the forest. They'll have guards stationed around it, but the real problem is the beacon itself." "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, crouching beside her. "The beacon isn't just a device," Arya explained. "It's alive, part machine, part organic. It reacts to threats and adapts faster than anything your world has. Disabling it will take more than brute force." Ethan frowned. "So, how do we stop it?" Arya hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. "I can overload it. Use my energy to disrupt its core and force it to shut down." Ethan's heart sank at her tone. But it will destroy me in the process," she said quietly, not looking at him. The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. "No, there has to be another way." "There isn't," Arya said, her voice steady but filled with sorrow. "The beacon is too powerful. It's designed to resist any external attack. The only way to take it down is from within." Ethan shook his head, his hands balling into fists. "I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself. We'll figure something else out." Arya placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle. "Ethan, listen to me. If we don't destroy that beacon, they'll bring more of my kind here. Your world will become theirs. Everything you know, everyone you care about, it will all be gone. And if you die..." Ethan shot back, his voice cracking. "What about you? Don't you matter?" Her gaze softened, and for a moment, the fierce warrior he had come to know seemed fragile. "I've lived my life in the shadows, following orders I never believed in. For the first time, I found something worth fighting for, worth dying for." Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to argue, to shout, to demand that she find another way. But deep down, he knew she was right. The beacon had to be destroyed, no matter the cost. "Then I'm going with you," he said, his voice firm. Arya opened her mouth to protest, but he cut her off. "I'm not leaving you to face this alone. If we're doing this, we're doing it together." She sighed, a small bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. "You're impossible." "I get that a lot," he said, trying to lighten the mood. They spent the next hour going over their plan. Arya would lead the charge, using her abilities to distract the guards, while Ethan made his way to the beacon. Once there, she would overload the core while he kept the aliens at bay. It was risky, reckless even, but it was all they had. When the time came to leave the cave, the forest was eerily quiet. The alien lights that had once chased them were nowhere to be seen, but the oppressive weight of their presence lingered. Ethan and Arya moved silently, sticking to the shadows as they approached the clearing. The beacon came into view, a towering structure of sleek metal and pulsing light. It stood at least 20 feet tall, its surface shifting and glowing like a living organism. Around it, a dozen alien figures patrolled the perimeter, their movements precise and mechanical. Ethan's grip on the disruptor tightened as he glanced at Arya. Her silver eyes glowed with determination, but he could see the tension in her posture. "Are you ready?" she whispered. "No," he admitted, "but let's do this anyway." Arya nodded, a hint of a smile on her lips. "Stay close." She stepped into the clearing, her body radiating a faint light that caught the attention of the guards. The aliens turned toward her, their weapons humming to life as they advanced. Arya raised her hands, and a burst of energy shot out, throwing two of them backward. "Go," she shouted. Ethan bolted toward the beacon, keeping low as chaos erupted behind him. Arya moved like a storm, her energy crackling in the air as she fought off the guards. The ground shook with each blast, and the alien shrieks echoed through the forest. Reaching the base of the beacon, Ethan stared up at the towering structure. The light from its core pulsed rhythmically, almost hypnotically. He pressed the disruptor against its surface and activated it, but the beacon merely absorbed the pulse, its glow intensifying. "It's not working," he shouted. Arya glanced at him, her face pale but resolute. "Then it's up to me." She fought her way to the beacon, her movements slower now, her energy waning. When she reached him, she placed a hand on his chest. "You need to go, Ethan. Get as far away as you can." "I'm not leaving you," he said, his voice breaking. "You have to," she insisted. "If you stay, you'll die too." Tears blurred his vision, but he nodded, knowing she wouldn't change her mind. "Arya." She smiled softly, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and gratitude. "Thank you, Ethan, for showing me what it means to feel." Before he could respond, she turned to the beacon, her body glowing brighter than ever. She placed her hands on its surface, and the air around her began to hum with energy. The beacon's light flickered, then surged as Arya poured everything she had into its core. "Run," she shouted. Ethan stumbled backward, his legs feeling like lead as he forced himself to move. He reached the edge of the clearing just as the beacon erupted in a blinding explosion of light. The shockwave knocked him off his feet, and everything went silent. When he opened his eyes, the beacon was gone, and the clearing was empty. No aliens, no Arya, just a faint, lingering glow where she had stood. Ethan fell to his knees, the weight of her sacrifice crashing over him. She was gone, but her memory burned brightly in his mind, a beacon of hope in its own right. He would carry her legacy, no matter the cost. Arya had given everything to save his world, and he would make sure her sacrifice was not in vain. A new hope. The forest was eerily quiet after the explosion, as if the world itself was mourning. Ethan sat on the ground, his back against a fallen tree, staring at the smoldering clearing where the beacon had once stood. His chest ached, not from the fight, but from the hollow, crushing loss of Arya. She was gone. The thought rang in his mind like a bell, over and over, drowning out everything else. He clenched his fists, his knuckles white, as he tried to hold on to the memory of her final words. "Thank you, Ethan, for showing me what it means to feel." The faint glow of the clearing began to fade, leaving nothing but scorched earth and silence. Ethan forced himself to his feet, his legs trembling as he took a step forward. He had to know, had to see for himself if anything remained of her. As he reached the center of the clearing, he stopped abruptly. There, in the middle of the ash and ruin, lay something small and faintly glowing. He knelt down, his heart pounding as he carefully picked it up. It was a crystalline shard, no larger than his palm, radiating a soft, pulsing light. "Arya," he whispered, his voice cracking. The shard seemed to respond, its glow brightening for a moment before settling into a steady rhythm. Ethan held it close, feeling a strange warmth emanate from it, a warmth that felt familiar, comforting. He didn't know how, but he was certain. This was her, or at least, a part of her. Ethan's mind raced as he stared at the shard. Was this all that was left of her? Could it mean something more? He didn't have answers, but he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she wasn't entirely gone. Maybe there was still a way to bring her back. The sound of rustling leaves snapped him out of his thoughts. Ethan turned sharply, clutching the shard protectively. From the shadows emerged a figure, human, disheveled, and armed with a rifle. It was one of the local hunters, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. "Hey," the man called out. "What the hell happened here? I saw the lights, heard the explosion. Are you okay?" Ethan hesitated, his mind scrambling for an explanation. "Yeah," he said finally. "I'm fine. Just some kind of freak accident." The hunter eyed him skeptically, his gaze lingering on the shard in Ethan's hand. "That doesn't look like no accident. You sure you're not hurt?" "I'm fine," Ethan repeated, tucking the shard into his jacket. "Thanks for checking." The man nodded slowly, still clearly uneasy. "You should get out of here. Whatever happened, it's not safe." Ethan nodded, though he had no intention of leaving without answers. As the hunter disappeared back into the forest, Ethan turned his attention to the shard. He needed to know what it was, what it could do. If there was even the slightest chance it held the key to saving Area, he wasn't going to let it slip away. Over the next few days, Ethan devoted himself to researching the shard. He reached out to anyone who might have knowledge of strange phenomena. Scientists, conspiracy theorists, even fringe groups online. Most dismissed him as crazy, but a few were intrigued, offering cryptic advice or theories about alien technology. One night, while sitting at his cluttered desk, Ethan noticed something unusual. The shard, which had been resting on a piece of fabric, began to glow brighter. A faint hum filled the air, and then, without warning, it projected an image, hazy at first, but quickly sharpening into clarity. It was Area. Ethan's breath caught as her image flickered before him, her silver eyes filled with the same quiet strength he remembered. She wasn't fully solid, more like a hologram, but it was her. There was no doubt in his mind. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft but clear. "If you're seeing this, it means I succeeded. The beacon is destroyed, and the connection to my world is severed." Ethan leaned forward, his hands trembling. "Area, I don't have much time," she continued, her image flickering slightly. "The shard you hold is a fragment of my essence. I left it behind so that you wouldn't have to face what comes next alone." "What comes next?" Ethan asked, his voice thick with emotion. "There will be consequences," she said, her expression turning serious. "My people will know the beacon is gone. They may send others to investigate, to finish what they started. You need to be ready." Ethan felt a surge of both fear and determination. How? How do I stop them?" "The shard holds more than just my essence," Area explained. "It contains knowledge, blueprints, data, things your world can use to defend itself. But it will take time to unlock, and you can't do it alone. Find others you trust. Work together. Humanity is stronger than they realize." Her image began to fade, the light of the shard dimming slightly. "Wait," Ethan said, panic rising in his chest. "Don't go. Area's gaze softened, and she smiled faintly. "I'm always with you, Ethan. Remember that." And then she was gone. Ethan sat in silence for a long time, the shard warm in his hand. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't let Area's sacrifice be in vain. She had given him a chance, a fighting chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. The first step was clear. He had to unlock the secrets of the shard, to understand the knowledge Area had left behind. Then he would find others, scientists, soldiers, anyone who could help. Together, they would prepare for what was coming. Ethan looked up at the night sky, the stars brighter than he'd ever noticed before. Somewhere out there, Area's people were watching, waiting. But so was he. For the first time since that fateful night in the diner, Ethan felt a spark of hope. The fight wasn't over, but he wasn't alone. And as long as he had the shard and the memory of Area, he knew he could face whatever came next. Humanity would stand, not just because it was strong, but because it had something worth fighting for.